Will there be a peace deal or will the fighting resume? The answer seems to be changing by the hour, especially in Washington. Donald Trump says he was only an hour away from going ahead with a strike on Iran on Tuesday, but put it on pause when Gulf leaders indicated that a deal with Iran might be close. Qatar has since put a dampener on that, claiming negotiators need a lot more time. But they might not have much. The president said he may still decide to launch strikes on Iran in 2 or 3 days if there's still no progress on talks. And speaking at the White House press briefing, his vice president said the US is ready to return to military action if a deal cannot be agreed.
We think that we've made a lot of progress. We think the Iranians want to make a deal. The President of the United States has asked us to negotiate in good faith, and that's exactly what we've done. So we're in a pretty good spot here, but there's an option B. And the option B is that we could restart the military campaign to continue to prosecute the case, to continue to try to achieve America's objectives. And we could talk a little bit about what that looks like, but that's not what the president wants, and I don't think it's what the Iranians want either. We have an opportunity here, I think, to reset the relationship that has existed between Iran and the United States for 47 years. That's what the president has asked us to do, and that's what we're going to keep on working at. But it takes two to tango. We are not going to have a deal that allows the Iranians to have a nuclear weapon. So as the president just told me, we're locked and loaded. We don't want to go down that pathway, but the president is willing and able to go down that pathway if we have to.
So let's speak now to our White House reporter, Bernd de Busman. Bernd, listening to JD Vance there, he's saying option B is not what the president wants to do, but they are locked and loaded and ready to go if Iran cannot come to an agreement. What's new about what we've just heard?
Well, we still don't have any details about the progress that Vice President Vance said is being made with regards to his negotiations. He did seem a little more optimistic about the prospect of a negotiated end to the war than the president has in recent days, but we don't know exactly what the sticking points are. Vance repeated the administration's red line that Iran cannot have a nuclear weapons, and he says he believes the Iranian government has internalized that, but that there can't be any guarantees about the talks until they see pen put to paper. And in the meantime, that option B, a resumption of full-scale combat operations, is still a possibility. I think one interesting new tidbit that Vance mentioned was a kind of rationale for the war that we haven't heard much from the administration again, and that they believe that if Iran were to secure a nuclear weapon, that would start a kind of a domino effect of other countries in the region also trying to manufacture a nuclear weapon, and that's part of why the administration believes that need to be stopped. That's not something that's often repeated by administration officials when they discuss the various reasons that they say they went to war for.
But what is clear, isn't it, Bernd, is that the nuclear option, as far as the US administration is concerned, is the absolute key sticking point.
That is very much still the sticking point, and that's something that President Trump, even as late as this morning, he says that that's his primary goal in the campaign. At the beginning of Operation Epic Fury in late February, there were several other reasons given for this war beginning, including, for example, Iranian support for proxy militias in Iraq or Lebanon. That seems, at least in public discourse, to have gone away as far as the Trump administration goes. And now the overarching campaign and goal that he brings up almost daily now is that Iran cannot have a nuclear weapon. Now, we don't know where he stands, for example, on a complete pause of a civilian nuclear program in Iran, but the primary focus is now, even more so than the Strait of Hormuz, that Iran cannot have a nuclear weapon.
Okay, our White House reporter, Bernd de Busman, thank you. Well, meanwhile, fighting continues in the south of Lebanon despite an extended ceasefire on paper. Israel issued urgent evacuation orders for 12 towns on Tuesday as it continues its strikes on Hezbollah targets. Lebanese media then reported a number of strikes across the south of the country. More than 400 people have been killed in Lebanon since the ceasefire started, more than 3,000 in total since the war started in March. Well, let's speak to our Middle East correspondent, Lena Sinjab in Beirut. Lena, just bring us right up to date with the details of those strikes.
Well, all these strikes are taking place in the south of the country, where Israel seems to be using the, ceasefire that has been announced by, expanding the airstrikes and the areas that they're controlling. From what it appears to be that they're trying to even get further inside the south of Lebanon, in some areas, reaching more than 10 kilometers inside the south of the country. More, as you said, more than 12, villages have been ordered to be evacuated today alone, but over the weekend, since this ceasefire extension was announced on Friday, more and more villages and towns have been ordered to be evacuated with more airstrikes. And Hezbollah, at the same time, is also intensifying its counterattacks on the Israelis, targeting, even sometimes trying to attack inside Israel, not only trying to attack Israeli forces on the ground inside the south of Lebanon.
Yeah, Israel arguing, of course, that it's targeting Hezbollah, but the reality is that over the last few months since the war started, there's had to be a huge amount of people, numbers of people relocating from their homes, trying to find safe space in Lebanon. Just take us through where we are now as this war continues, and in terms of the humanitarian efforts, even as there is a ceasefire, there are lots of people requiring a lot of help at the moment.
Well, let's start by talking about the figures and numbers that the Ministry of Health provided. So until today, since the war started on the 2nd of March, 3,020, or probably a little bit more, including today, have been killed. Over 600 of this number are women, children, and paramedics, including also journalists. The government doesn't show combatant numbers among the figures that they are quoting, and there are media reports suggesting that Hezbollah, those who are killed among Hezbollah, are not included in this number. So imagine the death toll that is rising. Some families have been killed completely. In the past few weeks, there were families that were killed entirely, including mother, a grandmother, children, grandchildren. And the story continues because, the Israelis are destroying villages and homes and infrastructure in the south, forcing more and more people into evacuation. Before the ceasefire, the number of the people who were displaced exceeded 1 million. Some of them tried to go back to their towns and villages after the ceasefire, but still many, thousands of them are displaced. Today, even here in Beirut, the government is trying to find new locations for those stranded by the sea, that they're still sleeping in tents. And most of these people require aid, require medical attention, require food, require hygiene kits. And the government is stretched out. International organizations, civil society are trying to help. But it's really making it more and more difficult, with more evacuation orders, with complete villages and towns being destroyed. And the Lebanese are so much attached to their land, to their homes, that connect them to their history, to their ancestors, to their grand families. And they are now feeling that they're just looking at the photos of destruction. And the negotiations that are taking place, sponsored by the Americans, are getting nowhere, because Israel seems to be determined to continue its fights against Hezbollah. But the ones who are paying the price are the civilians, who are losing homes and losing lives.
Lina Sinjab there with the impact of the war on the civilian population of Lebanon. Thank you. Well, as the conflict continues in the Middle East, the sustained high price of oil is having a real impact on the cost of living in a number of countries. Here are two examples. India raised fuel prices for the first time in 4 years on Friday, but less than a week later they've hiked them again as a result of the supply chain issues in the Strait of Hormuz. And then there's Kenya. Petrol prices were raised last week more than 20% to a record high, causing huge protests across the country on Monday. Our correspondents in Mumbai and Nairobi have the latest.
There definitely is frustration on price rise. It's not something that is welcome anytime. But there is also concern on the uncertainty of it. You know, the fact that there have been 2 price rises in just less than a week indicates now, these are clear indications from the government, that the buffers could be thinning in terms of how much the government can absorb, the increase in global crude oil prices. And now it is now being passed on to the consumers. And the fact that more could come in the days ahead. And that is adding on to concerns. We already know that small industries that depend on crude and gas, they've already been struggling for the last 2 months because of the shortages. Their operations have been curtailed. Some contractual workers have been let go. But that impact is there a possibility that impact is now expanding? Everyday goods have already started becoming more expensive. Transport will become more expensive now that the petrol and diesel hikes, and even hikes for the gas that powers some of the public transport like tuk-tuks and buses have also been hiked over the weekend. And all of this will start trickling down, making everyday goods transport more expensive. And also on the macroeconomic front, with the rupee depreciating and India's import bills rising because of the global crude oil price rise, that is also putting a lot of pressure on the government. And economists say more price hikes could come in the days ahead.
Well, the government has said that global oil prices and the instability in the Middle East really remain a major factor in this, but also outside of Kenya's direct control. But experts and opposition members and Kenyans have been urging them to relook at other domestic solutions like the reduction of taxes and levies. And have you know that the price pump here in Kenya, about 27 to 35% of it, depending on what you're using, petroleum, diesel, or kerosene, a big chunk of this percentage goes to taxes and levies, some of it going up to 35%. So the government is being urged to relook at the taxes and levies that they have imposed on the prices of petroleum to try and bring the prices down, regardless of the situation in the Middle East that's not under their direct control. They're also being asked to perhaps reconsider the government-to-government framework that they have entered into. Most of Kenya's oil comes from the Gulf countries, hence the kind of strain and pressure that the government finds itself into. So the government is also being urged perhaps to relook at this G2G, as it's being called here, a framework, and think about open tender system where they can bring in an aggressive and robust private sector competition forcing these oil prices to go down. But the bigger picture, these protests have led to 4 deaths so far. 30 people have been injured and more than 300 people have been arrested. We've seen total disruption of businesses, both formal and informal, as well as learning disruptions, as children have not been able to go to school since yesterday because of this particular strike.
Whether you are joining us on YouTube, TikTok, Sounds, radio or TV, thank you for your time. We will be back at the same time tomorrow with the Iran War Today.